Hi there, you're watching the Aussie BIM Guru, and today we're going to run through a tutorial in Dynamo for Autodesk Revit, which will deal with automatically putting parameters into families, which is quite an arduous task for a lot of BIM managers out there. So we're going to be using Dynamo today for this, as I said. The build is here for anyone that wants to replicate this. So I think this is currently the latest build, but you'll need to be on 2.0.2 at the very least. So we're going to basically try to build a script that looks a little bit like this. So in principle, we're going to take some data out of an Excel file and we're going to process it, and we're going to take advantage of a node called document add shared parameters to family, which is a part of a custom package that's on the database of custom packages for Dynamo. It can be found under packages, search for a package, and if you search for shared param sort by name, it should come up relatively close to the top once the server actually syncs in. Anyway, otherwise you can search this. There we go. So it's this package here. I think it only has one version. It's actually built back in 2016, but the parameter still works in this particular build of Dynamo, which is fortunate. And otherwise, everything else we're using is native to Dynamo itself. So we're going to start from scratch with this. But in principle, what we're doing today is a very common task that I've come across in the past when using Revit as a model manager and also a technician is a lot of the time my team would load in families from external sources, such as Revit City, and sometimes they don't have a lot of information in them. This one, for example, is an Autodesk chair, and you can see that in its properties, it only really has a couple of materials and an assembly code. So it's missing a few parameters that we always want in all our company's parameters, and they would be things such as authoring fields. So if I add a shared parameter for my shared parameter file, there's a bunch of authoring fields we usually use. So which company, when was it made, when was it modified, which version of Revit does it belong to, and who did it, mainly so that people can track down the author of the family, and we can put a little bit of intellectual property on what we do. We also have a few fields that we always want for data as well. So we have a code field and 2 comments, which enable a T-sheet style of reporting of elements. So a common task I used to have to go to is I'd add a parameter, add a shared parameter, make sure I've got my shared parameter file connected. You can do that under Edit, Browse, and you locate your shared parameter file. So I'd have to go company, I want it to go into text, and I'll make it a type parameter. And I'd have to do that every single time. So that would be about 7 or 8 parameters per family that I'm upgrading, which is quite a long task. So as I always think to myself when I'm using Dynamo and Revit, that there must be a faster way to do this and an easier way. So the script that I've built more or less solves the first part of that problem. So if I go up to Dynamo, I'm going to start a new script. So I'm just going to go new, and I won't save. I've got a lot of custom packages here, but you won't need any of these for this particular task. So what I've done in the background already is I've set up an Excel file that contains the parameters that I want, and a bit of information that node's going to need to use in order to take advantage of this Excel file. So I've got the names of the parameters in my first column, the data, the data of the group. So this is the name of the group in the shared parameter file. If I go back to Revit, I'll show you what I mean. So if I just go manage shared parameters, so these are the groups. As you can see here, ABG authoring is my authoring parameters, and ABG data is the group for my data parameters. So that's more or less what I've put in here. You can actually open shared parameter files to get some of this information more easily. I always recommend doing this very carefully. If you go all files in Excel, you'll actually be able to see text files as well. And what I might do here is I might just make a copy so that I'm not working live in the shared parameters file, because that can be quite damaging potentially. So I'll open this. So I immediately get prompted to basically format the text. So I'm going to say I want to delimit my data. I'm going to separate it by tab, and you can sort of see what's happening to it here. If I didn't separate it by tab, you just get a whole bunch of data in rows, which is too messy. We'll break it by tab and we'll finish. So you can see this is sort of formatted my shared parameter file for me. So you can get other things out of this as well, such as the IDs of shared parameters, which is quite helpful. You can also get the names. You can't get the names of the groups by parameter, but there is a helpful function that can be used to do this. So there's always this data category row here that never has anything in it. What I usually do is I put in a command here called VLOOKUP, and I'll be looking up 2 in this table. So basically I'm hunting for this value, and then I want to find what's in the second column next to it, which in this case is data. And I'll say false in terms of looking for a approximate match. I also want to make sure to lock my cell values for the table so that as I drag this formula down, they do not change. The only value that should change is this F10 that should keep going down. So you can see what it's done is it's actually pulling that field out of here. So if I go 1, you can see it's actually reading that. It's a really helpful function in Excel. What I'll do is I'll just drag that formula down, and there you go. That's your group, that's your parameter name. So you can copy this data across to the new Excel table, which is what I've done. And that's pretty much it. These are basically the group of the parameter in Revit that you want them to belong to in the family. So typically I put my code fields under the tab of identity data, and I put my my authoring fields under text. It's up to you which parameters you want for your company to go in here. The last column is just a yes or a no as to whether it's meant to be an instance parameter or a type parameter. Typically most of my parameters are type parameters when I'm pushing them in. Okay, so we'll just leave that Excel file. And what we're going to do is we're going to access this file in Excel. I'll sort of show you what I'm aiming for first. So this is a family that I've built for my company. You can see its properties are much more defined and well set up. So you might also want to push in depth, width, and height if the family doesn't have any. Other fields, maybe it's a placeholder family, but you can see here I've got code, comment 1, comment 2, which is basically the same as the parameters I'll be using, and then some authoring fields as well. The one thing the script won't do today is actually populate these with default values. I'm still sort of trying to figure that side of the script out, but I thought I'd share where I've got to so far. Okay, so we'll go to Dynamo. So this script has to begin with Excel. So for those that don't use Dynamo as much, I'll try to sort of mention what I'm doing as I go, but it's probably good to have a basic knowledge of how Dynamo works whilst watching me do this. So you can right click and you can start searching for things. So I know roughly what I'm looking for based on my experience with Dynamo, and I'm looking for import from Excel. So I'll just look up Excel, and I've got import, export Excel. So I've got a block. I'm just going to go to manual mode so that my Dynamo doesn't get too slow. Basically manual will only run when I tell it to. So I'm going to get my file path. So I need to get not only my file, but also its path as well. So I'll start with the path of that Excel file, which is in here. But then I need to convert that path to a file. So I'm going to say file from path. And this node will turn that path into a file. I need to say what sheet name I'm referring to. So I'll just double check what I've called that sheet. It's called parameters. So I'll get a string parameters. In future tutorials, I probably will skip some of these steps because I know this can take quite a while. But I thought the first few tutorials, it's good to sort of show people how I set up a script from the start. So I'm going to read the data as strings, so text, and I don't want to see the Excel file when I use it. So if I run this, you can see it's basically giving me a set of rows of data. So I've got my header row, and then I've got my parameters. So parameter, parameter group in Revit, and is it instance. So what I want to do is I want to get rid of this top row because I don't want to use that data. So when I usually build a script, I like to use an integer slider to control this. I'm going to say at minimum it can be 1, at maximum it can be 10 in increments of 1. And this gives you a control to say how many rows of data do I want to ignore at the top. And I'm going to use a function called list drop items. And I'm going to drop that many items from my table. So if I run that, you'll see my table now is only considering the data and it's ignoring the header because it's dropped that first item. If I change that, obviously it will ignore more data. So I go further into my list basically. But by default, typically I'd expect that to be 1. But that allows people to be more flexible with the sort of table that they're putting into the file, because we will eventually hook this up to Dynamo Player. Okay, so the next step is we actually need to process some of this data. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to transpose the list. So the columns will become rows, and the rows will become columns. So this group represents all the codes, or the parameter names, all the groups, all the parameter groups, and are they instance or type? In this case, they're all type. So the first thing we need to do is we actually need to get a hold of some parameter group names. So we need to get this field here. So I know for this script, I need identity data and I need text. And it's important that we maintain this data as parameter groups. We can't just push a string into the final node. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a list from these two. And I will put the script up publicly at the end so that you have access to it. Okay, and then we're going to make a string from object. And basically what that will give us is all those strings in the list. So these are actually text, these are parameter groups. So what we're trying to do is replace all of these with the actual parameter groups instead. And the easy way to do that is probably to actually check the index of these as they occur in this list. So we're going to put in these, I think it's this way around, it's the list and the element. No, it must be the other way, sorry. Oh, I've done something wrong, haven't I? I'll just quickly check the node that I ended up using in the end, just to be sure, because I remember this step I had to actually do a bit of experimenting to get the right combination of nodes with my list management. So I did index of that in, I know what I've done wrong. So I haven't actually broken down the data enough. I need to actually get that part of the list. So I tried feeding in the whole list. What I need to do is get just that packet of data that I care about. So I want to get index number 2 in the list. So I'll run this. So you've got all these lists. I want just this list. So I'm going to get item at index 2. Then we're going to feed in them like this. So basically it's telling me identity data is at index 0, text is at index 1. So it's basically telling me where to expect those values to be in this list. And then what we can do is we can feed that back into a get item at index. So we want to get items from the parameter groups list at these indexes. And what we'll end up with is basically, these are parameter groups. They don't look like it, but they are. Okay, so that's one part of the script. The second part is that we also need to process these into false or true. So we're just going to do equals, and we're going to get a whole bunch of conditions. So we're going to get item, sorry, almost made the same mistake. We're going to get item at index 3. Yes. And then we're going to compare, is that equal to the string? Yes. And if it is, it will become true. If it's not, it will be false. So I've basically got a whole list of falses at the moment. However, if I went back and I made one of these yes, and I reran my script, you see now I've got a true. So the main part of this script is basically data processing. I'm just processing a lot of data into something that Revit and Dynamo understand. Okay, so we've got true, false, we've got the parameter group. So what we want to do is just get a few more items at index to break this list apart. So we want the parameter names, which are at index 0 in that list. As you can see, I'll just zoom in there a little bit so you can see it. These are our names. Then we want items at index 1. Okay, so take that and we'll just copy that. The great thing when you copy things in Dynamo is they remember their inputs if they're able to hold on to them. So item at index is a very easy node to copy. Sometimes when I build a script, I like to actually rename some of my nodes. So if you double click on a node, you can say parameter name. And that changes how it looks for someone that's editing the script. So you say parameter group. You can say PG for the parameter group in Revit. And type based. And we can just move those a bit closer. So all that's left now really is to take the node in here in this custom package called add shared parameters to family. Okay, so really we're just putting all the data together now. And all our lists, it's important to note, they're all the same length. So the way Dynamo is going to deal with this data is it's going to line up the rows. So it's going to consider all items in 0, then all items in 1 if we feed these all in. So Dynamo is really great like that. So we're going to go parameter name, parameter group, what's the group name in Dynamo, and is it type or instance. Okay, so at this point the script is pretty much ready to be run. So currently I'm in my family. I'll just do a save on this one, and I'll just close this other family that's actually set up properly. Sometimes with this script I like to reopen the script just to be sure that it's recognizing I'm in the right file. So I'll just go new and then I'll reopen that script I just built. So it's important to note at this time there's no parameters in this family that I want. It's important that while you run this script you're connected to the right shared parameter file. So you do want to make sure this is here, because this script relies on the active shared parameter file in your session. If I click run, it was very quick. Done. Look at that. They're all there. All there. And you can run this many times on many families while you're working. One little upgrade that I like to add to this script, obviously I like to clean it up a little bit. It's not the cleanest script, but let's just make it a Dynamo Player script. So I'm just going to right click on my file and say is input, and let's just call that Excel file path. That way the user knows what type of file we're looking for. I'll just make this an input and say number of rows to ignore from top in Excel. And that's quite easy, so that one should be set as well. So the only thing that you will need to do with this script otherwise is you probably will need to come back and add more of these to this list if you end up adding more types of parameter groups to your table, because ideally this document can be a live evolving document. So what I've actually done here is this cell here is actually a drop down, and I've actually used a tool in Excel called data validation, and I've limited it to a list of data, which is basically this range here. So that at least makes sure you can't pick a group that doesn't exist, but you will stand it to come in and add more things here. So I could say PG data, but then I'd have to make sure that in Dynamo I also come and add PG data. For example, I'd have to copy this, drop this down, find data, add this, and plug this in as well. I haven't found the node that can get all these groups at once so that you never have to revisit the script, but that would be the ideal way to use this. Sometimes in Dynamo too, I like to take all my inputs right to the start, and I like to right click and group them, create group, and I'll give them usually a yellow color and call the group inputs, so that if someone comes to my script, they understand how it works. You could make this an input as well, actually, the sheet name that it's coming from, just in case someone decides to get a bit special and use their own Excel file. But usually what I'll do is I'll give a template out when someone runs this script, but you never know, so we'll just rename that to sheet name. Easy. Usually if I'm processing, I'll try to put things in sets of how I'm processing it, so I'll just say get Excel data. probably move this off a little bit because that's a bit more of a complicated node. And I try to keep my strings away from other strings where possible, just so you can see which direction everything's moving in. So I might just group all that together and call this parameter group native, assuming it's the Revit parameter group, not the shared parameter files group. For this, I might package this into its own area, so I might just take all that, move it down a little bit, say is type to boolean being true false, and I could just take that and say shared parameter info. That way someone now has a bit more of an idea of how my script works. I usually like to make a group even around one node, even if it is one, and just call that output. And you could make an output in Dynamo Player as well, so that you see if it works. So what we'll do is we'll just run that again, but instead we'll go through Dynamo Player. For those that aren't aware, Dynamo can be run through a lightweight version, which I much prefer for basic users. I'll just open this one here. Because I find otherwise people don't really know how to run a script, or they're too worried they might damage it. So I'll just go to Dynamo Player. I'll just wait for that to boot up. Cool. So I will navigate to my desktop, and then I will have to find, it's going to be a little bit difficult, isn't it? Okay, I might just go to desktop. Oh, there we go. So we want to modify the properties of what we're using. And those inputs that we set before should be available for us. Sometimes scripts can take a little while to open up. So by default, it remembers the Excel file that we're pathing to. It remembers all the data, basically. The output hasn't shown up. I'm not sure why that is. We might need to do a watch node to get the output to work, I think. So I'll just open up the script again in Dynamo. You can actually go to the script via Dynamo Player. I forgot you could do that. Should have saved a little bit of time. As you can see, Dynamo is a bit of a heavy program to open sometimes, but it does a lot of heavy work, so it's excused, I think. So what I can do is I'll do a watch node, and I'll stop that being an output, and I'll watch the output, and I'll make the watch output, and I'll just call that what has happened to the family. I'll save that. I'll go back to Dynamo Player, back to its properties. As you can see, it's a little bit faster now because it's opened up once, which can save a bit of time. You can see the document that you're about to apply things to down here as well. Okay, so we're going to ignore one. There we go. There's our output. So now if I run this, there you go. It turns out the output from the script is called "Oh yeah, baby." It's good to know that the person has a sense of humor. Under type properties, and there you go. So you can run it without even opening Dynamo. So that's pretty much the script in a nutshell. However, there's more you could do with it. You could actually build the script to also populate some of those fields. I believe you might need Python for that, which is a bit of a barrier for me at the moment, but when I've solved the problem, I'll definitely show a tutorial about that. And there'll be more tutorials coming for Dynamo as well, so feel free to request anything below that you're after, and feel free to follow me if you enjoyed this. So thanks for watching. Bye.